Is that right?
Yeah. Can I make it full screen?
Yeah. We can do one.
All right.
Yeah. Right here.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Okay.
Check.
Yeah. Okay. So hi, we're presenting over case 2. It's called Are We Getting to Big Bird Boots? So we'll introduce ourselves and then we'll get started. I'm Kirsten. I'm Lexi.
I'm Kyle.
And I'm Jackie. So our case is over a company called Gillian Pool and Spa Supplies. This company was founded by Andy Gillian 10 years ago, right after he graduated college with a marketing degree. He knows everything there is to know about the pool and spa industry, but he lacks knowledge in accounting and finance. So the business started off pretty well, but he was able to just secure some local contracts, but that didn't take him super far. The first 2 years of the business, he operated out of a delivery truck. And then after 2 years, he decided to open up their first retail store location. And at this point, the revenues were pretty steady, healthy. But at year 5, Andy decided to make another change and go into a larger facility at a much more expensive shopping complex. So this decision made him take on a lot of debt, and he ended up having to give less strict credit terms and broaden their inventory up a lot, just to attract more business. And then the last 2 years is where things started pretty much just going really south for them. They had negative income and really weak cash flows. So to get some help on this, Andy decided to hire a new intern from a local school business that was studying accounting and finance to help him get his company back on track. Okay. Oh, yeah, let's start it.
To get into the analysis, we're going to start with the sales and earnings trends. First, we have our sales 5-year CAGR, which was a positive growth rate of 11.05%. This is pretty good because the industry average is between 8% and 12%, and they're on the higher end of that average. And then we have the gross profit 5-year CAGR, which is actually 4.69%. And while this is still positive, it could be low because of the cost of goods sold CAGR, which is 12.35%. And it just indicates that there is slow growth because it's positive. And then we have the EBIT 5-year CAGR. This is very low at negative 9.79%. This could be low because of cost of goods sold and expenses increasing. And then we have net income, which has decreased by $35,250 in the last 5 years, which is a pretty big decrease.
Okay, so yeah, so things that we'll be analyzing when we look at how the health of the company is doing is the balance sheet, which was given to us, the income statement, and some cash flows that are available. We will also be looking at the common size statements, just because that's easiest to compare across different years and across the industry. We will also be completing a DuPont analysis, which is a calculation of return on equity, but with some other factors, which we'll go into later. And then we'll be doing some financial ratios, including asset utilization, liquidity, profitability, and long-term solvency.
So for our analysis, we don't just analyze our own company, we also analyze the other competitors in our industry. So we need to find what industry we're in and sector. Obviously, it's the pool and spa sector, or industry, yes. And then sector most likely fall into consumer cyclical. From there, we can compare financials with common size statements, and all of those are derived from the 10K issue. We can also compare ratios. It's a little less common. And there's a lot of websites that give you ratios. You don't even have to do anything like ratios, but you can also calculate all those yourself. And then from there, we need to make observations and then changes. We can ask ourselves, like, what are we doing better? What are our competitors doing better? And then how can we change to be better? Taking a look at the common size balance sheet first, everything's taken as a percent of total assets. One of the most alarming things is their cash has decreased significantly, starting at about 25% in 2011 down to 1.9% in 2015. While a decrease in cash isn't always bad, when it's mostly converted into current assets, it's not showing much reinvestment into the business. And you can see that with accounts receivable increasing by almost 10% and inventory increasing by also almost 15–20%. Their accounts receivable, they're giving better credit terms to make more sales, and they're not collecting on those terms near as much as they were at the beginning of their company. And with their inventory, they are pulling a lot more inventory on hand, which just increased their costs. When we take a look at the liabilities and equity, their current liabilities as well as the long-term liabilities have increased significantly because they're taking on debt, both long-term, short-term, and mortgages. And that also leads to a decrease in total equity from 52% down to 35.6%. And that can show that the company is becoming more, their capital structure is becoming more debt heavy as opposed to capital stock heavy. When we look at the common size income statement, it takes everything as a percent of net sales. As we mentioned earlier, the cost of goods sold is increasing. That is not a good sign. While some of that is due to inflation, they're just buying more inventory and they have to hold it for longer, which leads to that increase. Their miscellaneous expenses also are increasing pretty significantly. That can tell us that they need to focus on their costs and maybe cut some of those. We can also see their interest is increasing there, and that leads their net income to decrease. As Jackie discussed earlier, we're going to go into the coupon analysis, which just takes up a couple different ratios, and that measures ROE. While there are a lot of ratios that can make up ROE, the most three common are profit margin, total asset turnover, and equity multiplier. As we talked about earlier, the company was doing pretty good the first 3 years, and you can see their profit margin shows that at about 3%, and then it decreases in 2014 to 2015. Their total asset turnovers remain pretty constant, so that doesn't have as big of an effect on ROE. And then their equity multiplier has increased significantly just because they're issuing more debt. And that makes your ROE more significant, whether that's in a positive direction or negative direction. In this case, it's starting to turn negative.
Okay, next we'll move on to the ratio analysis. First, I'll go over the liquidity ratios, which are the current quick and cash ratios. Current is still pretty good, but it had a huge decrease from 6.38 in 2011 to 3.79. And then quick ratio and cash ratio, they both had significant decreases as well, which quick was 2.54 in 2011 and is now currently at 0.62. And then cash was 2.38 in 2011 and dropped to 0.1 by 2015, which the quick and cash are no longer good. They're underneath 1, which shows that they're not very liquid. And then we have the asset utilization, inventory turnover and days inventory. They both had a constant, they both stay pretty constant, but it takes 156 days now for them to sell inventory. And then we have receivables turnover and days receivables. It now takes 22 days for them to collect on credit, which shows that they could be too generous with their credit items. And then we have total asset turnover. This stayed pretty constant through the 5 years and pretty healthy. And then capital intensity was 0.71 in 2011 and decreased to 0.64. This is okay, but it's a little too high. And then for long-term solvency, we'll go into the ratios a little bit more in depth later. But from these ratios, we can see that their ability to pay interest is decreasing. And then we have the profitability ratios. First, we have the profit margin, which was 3.63% and decreased all the way to negative 0.2% by 2015, which is a pretty big decrease and shows that the company is no longer profitable. And then we have ROA, which was 5.11% and decreased to negative 0.3%. And ROE, which was 9.7% in 2011 and decreased to negative 0.75% by 2015. From these, we can see that they're losing money on their assets and equity, and they're also decreasing their shareholders' value.
All right, for this slide, the question is, if you were the commercial loan officer and he approached for a short-term loan of $50,000, what would be your decision and why? So to answer this question, I looked at these 4 ratios: total debt, debt to equity, cash coverage, and time interest earned. If we just look at the first one, the average is 0.589, which is pretty high, and it shows that the company has taken on some risk. If we look at the debt to equity, it's not much better. The average is 1.498. In 2011, they started out all right. They had more equity than they did have debt, but it just increasingly got worse. So another thing to look at as a loan officer would be how much cash the company has offhand. So look at the cash coverage ratio, and they started off pretty strong. They had, or they were able to pay their interest 5 and almost 11 times over, but dropped really significantly in 2013 and continued dropping, which is pretty alarming. The average is 3.877, is really pretty skewed by the first 2 solid years they had. As you can see, in 2015, 0.33 is not close to 3.877. And then if we look at the last ratio, it had an average of 2.206, and it is low and just has kept decreasing. Something really alarming in 2015. They did not cover or make enough money to cover the interest expense that they owe. So overall, looking at these ratios, if I was the loan officer making this decision, it would be pretty simple. The company has shown really no implications of being able to handle another loan. So I would not give them a loan.
I'll be discussing some recommendations that can provide opportunity for the business to improve and maybe reapply for that loan in the future. First, inventory management needs to improve. They're currently holding too much inventory on hand, which is causing an increase in their costs. To keep track of their inventory, they should know their suppliers, their countries of origin, the costs of their products, and variables that affect the costs, such as cyclicality and shortages. They should also know how much of each product is being sold and how much they currently have on hand. And all of this collected data can be analyzed to see what products are being sold faster and if there's a specific time that a particular product needs to be restocked. And prioritizing their inventory is another effective way to gain better control of it. This provides a visual understanding of what the company needs to order, when they need to order it. And it can also identify items that are important to the business, but may require more time and money to get. Second, they should examine and refine their credit collection policies. Before a sale and payment are accepted via credit, the credit report of the customer should be retrieved just to be sure that the receivable can actually be collected. Sending their invoices immediately, whether it be electronically or physically, is also necessary, and returns and due date need to be both stated. Offering flexible payment options is another way to incentivize credit collections. And for this business, the credit sales are not bad, but their lenient terms can lead to delayed collections, and that's what's bad for business. Lastly, they need to evaluate and reduce their miscellaneous expenses and their cost of sales. One way for them to reduce the cost of sales is to measure their sales performance on profit instead of revenue, because when sales performance is measured against revenue, that can cause the employees to cut a deal just to close that sale and causes the business to lose money. They can boost their profitability by following these recommendations, which again are reducing the costs and gaining better control of that inventory and of the accounts receivable. Next, I'll talk about some problems One problem that a financial analyst would have to cope with is the lack of age in the accounts receivable. This process estimates the value of those receivables that are likely to not be collected. And when this is done incorrectly or not at all, the financial statements are overstated. Another issue that we kind of touched on earlier is not having a suitable benchmark. And not having a suitable benchmark and not understanding the industry is preventing the business from being able to generate attainable goals and constructing a clear path to reach those goals. Another effect of not understanding the industry is the financial analysis would have issues projecting future sales, and it can cause the business and has caused the business to have major inconsistent gains and losses.
So as we discussed all of these issues that they're having with profitability and cost of goods rising, as well as their increase in debt, they are not currently a super profitable and healthy firm. So, but with the changes, they could potentially turn it around, but they are in fact getting too big for their boots currently. Yeah, any questions? Kevin?
What do you think should be the number one goal for the company? What should it be? Things that, you know, like improving their inventory days, should it be improving on day, should it be increasing debt? What do you think is the number one priority the company should have?
Really, it's not a number one thing. There's a lot of different things going on. Their inventory is a big issue, and that increases their costs. So their cost is the biggest thing right now that decreases their ROE and just because they're not a good company. So when they decrease their inventory and cut costs, so I guess cost cutting would be better, but there's also a lot.
So we have Allison, Jabin, Sion, and one. Yeah, right. So yeah, can go step by step. Start from first race.
So whenever you were looking at your ratios and you're saying they're high, low, is that compared to themselves, industry average, or just general feeling of what it should be?
Just general.
Okay.
So the answer is a time series. Go back to the slide. So if you look at it, look at that corporations over time, right? So it's basically only that corporations. Yeah. You have a questions?
Yeah. The some years there's a big decrease on the company's dividend profitability. And how does this affect the companies and the company's potential investors, and how your recommendations help with these issues?
So right now, it doesn't look like they're looking for new investors. They're been pretty debt heavy, so it's probably better that they get a new investor. They need to fix their inventory and their costs in order to attract an investor.
So under your recommendations slide, you stated option C, evaluate and reduce miscellaneous expenses. So do we have any indication as to how much like miscellaneous expenses actually cost the company, considering their extremely low amount of cash on hand? How much do these actually affect their financials?
Yeah, so I can go back to the balance sheet.
So I don't have the raw numbers on it here, but you can tell that miscellaneous expenses right here. In 2011, it was like 3%. That's jumped all the way up to 1.5. There's no indication that growth's stopping. So while it may have a small effect, if there is an effect there, that is decreasing there.
This is a general question. What was the most difficult one? What in 5 years, you know, generally opinion, where do you see this company at?
Well, if they take our recommendations, hopefully strong, if they continue down the path they're with now, with not reducing costs or just holding too much inventory, I can very well see them going out of business or continuing.
Okay, and just to verify, I'm not sure though, but I think you guys do not do projections because that was not required in the part of the case, right? You do projections like 2016, 2017.
They didn't ask.
Yeah, I did ask for it. So the question is, they don't know, right? Because they didn't do it. That's not part of the case.
And this is just done for like.
So anyone else?
Usually the companies like try to expand too quickly, is that why it's like a lot of cost of goods sold like increase so fast or certain specific that? you think it applies? The cost of goods sold, other than inflation and, inventory too long.
Honestly, I feel like they tried to fix something that wasn't really broken. They moved from the smaller facility that was reasonably low cost to a much more expensive one. And so if their like revenues and earnings were good in that smaller facility, I don't see a reason why they needed to move so soon.
And especially making that big of a jump when they didn't have their financials necessarily super in order was a pretty big move for somebody who didn't know much about financials at the time.
You might have mentioned this before, but what the trigger?
It's too good.
It's the compound annual growth rate, so it basically takes the rate and said, okay, from 2011 to 2015, what is the equal rate that grows each year?
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone? Or it's like any? Okay, can I ask something? So can you, okay, so on that slide, what do you think, like, what is the components of gross profit for growing this much?
Because gross profit, because of the cost of goods sold CAGR is so.
So the gross profit CAGR, there's a mistake on the slide. The gross profit CAGR, I think you said was
It was
around
4%.
Yeah.
But 12.35 is the cost of goods sold CAGR. There was just a mistake in those slides.
Yeah, that was my point was, and also you mentioned your cost of goods, so you need the EBIT CAGR. So the idea is when you're analyzing your gross profit, the two components are your sales and cost of goods sold. And after you're done with the gross profit analysis, on the next end, like for your operating profit or EBIT analysis, cost of goods sold doesn't make any results. It's done. So now you're talking about the selling and general and administrative expenses, other business expenses, depreciation, something like that. Make sense? So moving on, let's go to your two-point analysis. So if you look here carefully, your profit margin is consistently going down, right? Can you tell me like what causing this profit margin to be going down?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'm just assuming it's more of their interest expenses and their.
Absolutely, that's a correct answer. But my point was, you can further decompose your profit margin to three different components because there's an extended version of 2 components, five components, right? Not 3. So if you have done that, then you can really show, hey, profit margin is going down because they have a lot of interest bearing units, right? Makes sense. Can you go down further 2 slides? Have you, I don't know, it's not a really important question, but just curious. Have you looked at short-term debt to asset, short-term debt to equity? Because that question is more about providing short-term debt, right? Rather than long-term debt. I did not put that. Okay, it's fine. That's it. You will be first now.
What? Does the clicker work?
Agreement.
We're gonna present case for Vinkins. I'm Ananya.
I'm Brielle.
I'm Eugene.
And I'm Shannon.
Okay, let's start with the case background. Don and Jade have oatmeal snack companies for healthy things. They started the company in 2008 and they have great sales of over $4 million by 2015. Still is confident that sales will increase significantly over the next few years because of the current trends of eating healthy and keeping fit. However, they think the company is grow so fast, so they need to plan for the futures. For the plan, they want to know how much additional funding they need for the next year. If growth rate of revenue is going to be between 25% and 40%. And these are approaches we can use to create our financial forecast. For top-down approach and performance model, we used to predict the value for 2016 income statement and balance sheet for sustainable growth rates. These are if the company wants to keep the debt to equity ratio constant, this model can help them to find the growth rate that they can drive sales as much as possible without increasing the ratio. And the last one is external financing needs or EFMs. This model can help them to identify fundings that might be collected to support the predicted sales. And the funds must be obtained from outside sources such as debtor and investor.
One of the things that Healthy Grains came to us for was they wanted to see how much internal financing they can do. So essentially, without any external financing, what's the potential growth rate? So to get there, we use the return on assets. You guys can read, but we calculate the return on assets. That's the income. Yeah. We also got the retention rate, and then we just plugged it in, and it can grow 12.23% without the need for any external financing. With that, it also came to us about revenue growth, and they had 3 assumptions with that. The first assumption is given a certain percentage of revenue growth, what would the balance sheet and the income statement in 2016 look like? It's just one balance sheet, but what would the 2016 numbers look like? And the second assumption was we also would keep debt to equity constant from 2015, because I think this was calculated as 25%, but it's calculated as 25%. It's at 42, it's low. So they want to keep that 0.58. And the third one is they want to build enough liquidity to help them finance and keep up with the growth of revenue, the orders that they get when they're going into business. So that's what we did. We calculated. So we calculated that. That's the 99,000 amount right here. We calculated that using the long-term debt from 2015 divided by the total equity and the estimated total equity from 2016 was 25%, and that's roughly 136.2% increase. Using the 25%, given 25% growth in revenue. Given the 4% growth, 4% is bigger. We have a bigger number. That's the sorry if y'all can see this, but that's the 113,000 right here. That's 142.39% increase. And you can see that debt to equity has been kept the same. That's to comment on this a little bit more, they're doing really good for the industry that they're in. So the fact that they want to manipulate the numbers and keep debt to equity ratio the same I feel like it's a good idea, because having debt to equity ratio that's too low shows like the business is not utilizing its debt financing as it should, given the much presence they have in the industry. So it's good that they want to kind of keep it like a good constant rate. And also it's gonna help them generate enough cash towards whether they want to increase PPE or whatever, increase revenue, you want to help themselves out.
Okay, so for the question 4, Matt assume that the firm is operating at the full capacity and we want to know the additional financing to support revenues growth rate measured from 25% to 40%. We should know that PPE is, the net PPE is proportional to the revenues, so we can get this equation. And in the case of 25% revenue growth rate, the revenues in 2016 is 1.25 times of the revenues in 2015. So the PPE in 2020 and 2016 is 1.25 times of the PPE in 2015. So we can calculate the increased net PPE by this equation. This one is the net PPE in 2015. And similarly, we can calculate the case of revenue growth rate to be 40%. So we can know the additional financing to between 96 to 50 to 154,000. And actually, the company find the operating expense at 9% capacity, so that which means they use 9% of the PPE to create the revenues in 2015. So the new equation should be like this, and we can similarly calculate the additional financing by those two calculations. And we can know the additional financing to be 86,625 to 138,600.
Okay, so they wanted to know what they could do to alleviate the need for external financing, and we came up with 4 different options. The first one was to increase their retention ratio. They can do this by keeping more retained earnings and not paying dividends. The problem with this could be that investors would not be happy with no dividends all of a sudden. So we suggest just decreasing the amount of dividends instead of just cutting them out altogether. Second thing is they could increase sales, but that's easier said than done. They might need to invest more to increase sales, which then defeats the point of alleviating the external need for financing if they need more money. So third option, we said they could just lower their costs. Another one is just easier said than done. They'll have to do a lot of research to find cheaper supplies, but they don't want to sacrifice quality. So that'll take a bunch of research. The fourth thing is to increase prices. And once again, you got to look at your competitors, make sure there aren't substitutes that people will go to instead of yours if you increase prices. So just a lot of research will be done to do these, but these are our 4 recommendations. They also wanted to know if financial planning was critical. We decided it was not because they generate enough to pay their interest payments and their debt isn't too high. But we're always going to recommend financial planning. It's never a bad thing. And they currently can support a growth rate of 12.27%, as we said earlier, but they are expecting growths of 25 to 40%. So if they want to get there, they're going to need to do some planning and they're probably going to need some external financing. So we do recommend it. It's just not critical.
Okay, so the final thing that Healthy Greens wanted to look at was their pro forma in 2016. They wanted to look at the income statement and the balance sheet. And like Kevin said earlier, they want to keep their same debt to equity ratio at 0.58. And they also wanted to see this at 40% growth. And the reason they chose this growth is because they knew they could support a growth between 25 and 40%. And this 40% was above the 30% industry average, so they wanted to see what that looks like. We also calculated earlier that they could support up to 38%, which is very close to this 40. So the first thing we did was apply this 40% to sales. And as you can see, they have new sales about 6 million. And then using all of these new 2016 income statement values, we were able to calculate how much needed to be allocated. Allocated back into either accounts receivable, inventory, or long-term debt in the balance sheet. So we used our new retained earnings of approximately 197,000 and our depreciation of 25,000 to calculate. They had about 222,000 to be allocated back. We chose to allocate these between accounts receivable and inventory. The amounts were decided by dividing the 2015 accounts receivable by the 2015 inventory and then multiplying this percentage by the 222,000. Because of this allocation, you can see the most changes in the balance sheet are the accounts receivable and in the inventory. However, there's also changes in cash, long-term debt, and net PPE, which is their plant, property, and equipment. One major thing you can see is that PPE itself has not changed between 2015 and 2016, but since their depreciation increases at the normal 25,000, it decreases their net PPE for 2016. And this is where you can see they need some additional financing because PPE plays a big role in generating revenues. So you can also see that there's an increase in the long-term debt, and because of this, keeping the debt to equity ratio at 0.58 and our retained earnings increasing our equity section, so we had to increase the long-term debt to keep that at 0.58. So overall, you can see that the Healthy Grains Inc. is expected to have a good future financial position. We don't believe that it's critical because they generate enough money to pay their $66,000 a year for their interest payment. However, we do believe that they could use financial planning if they want to see their desired growth rate at 40%. And even though we may not think it's 100% necessary, like we said earlier, we know they will need additional financing for PPE, so we came up with the 4 ways to alleviate the external financing. This was increasing the retention ratio, lowering costs, increasing sales, and increasing prices. If they follow these, we believe they will have a good financial position in the future without needing heavy external financing and will be able to do their desired growth.
Questions?
Which of those 4 ways that you guys described, would you need some of the external financing because there's privately in these circumstances?
We would probably need to know more about their competitors and just more about the industry itself, which we did not do more research on, because if they wanted to increase prices and stuff, we need to make sure there isn't substitutes that are cheaper, which I'm going to assume just because it's a grain snacks, I believe. Healthy grains, yeah, snacks. There's probably going to be competitors. So that one will be difficult. Increasing sales would also be difficult, but they're probably gonna have to invest in like advertising or something other than what we researched. Keeping investors happy is important. Huh. That is a great question. I answered it? Did I answer it? Okay.
What?
If they want to lower debt equity from 0.58 and continue to grow, how do you think that will change their growth overall?
Want to lower it?
Yeah.
Equity. We show that they have less debt, but like I said, to use some debt financing because if you have projects that you want to start on, you want to keep going and some money now, why not do that to go to you?
I believe they had a lower debt to equity, so if you actually wanted numbers, we could look at their old stuff, but that would represent that.
With them wanting to increase their growth by 25 to 40% require them to expand. And if so, did you consider that within their costs?
Go back to the balance sheet slide.
I'll go back to my slide. Keep going.
The one.
Keep going. It's not hard to do. All right, go back to yours.
Well, go back to the other one.
Yeah, right here. Yeah, I think we did take into account that cost was going to increase 80%. We don't have like that source like this. Excel would have where that 0.83 is coming from. Like, top of my head, I can't remember. But we did take into account. So when you keep going, it isn't enough for the cost, obviously, because you're making more. So. Did it comment?
Okay, so you guys said, one of the strategies here would be to change the retention ratio by decreasing dividend growth.
Something around like that. Yes.
Okay, so, how much of the dividend does this company pay? Like how
We don't have that
You
information.
don't have that?
I looked at it, it was really low, maybe like $1 something.
Were
Oh,
we
no, this-
provided
this
that
is
info?
investment. So, here's the answer. How much they retain?
RE, is that what you're looking at? 2015 or 2016, which one you were?
So for example, if they have, I believe, 290,000 as net income. And if they retain 131 only,
Right.
what do they do? Yeah, maybe 167,000 they just pay the dividend.
So if the dividend was decreased, wouldn't that be an indicator of financial distress? Because companies don't usually do that, and would it lock them off from external financing, or
But I think they are not decreasing the dividend.
I thought
That
it
was
said
an option if they wanted
Okay.
to not do any external financing.
All right.
It would be recommended to avoid that. That was the problem with.
Okay.
decreasing.
Yeah,
So if more external financing was made, and what would be and kind of a desired retention rate in the guys prefer that leads to help the company growth factor?
we didn't calculate that was, we didn't calculate the one retention rate because I want to keep that constant. But, so do you mean like the growth of the company or would you be,
Kind of a benefit that company.
if they increase the retention rate?
Yeah, if you, what would be your desired retention rate?
I think we're planning on keeping it constant for now.
That's the desired, because if we were to change it, that would mess up our numbers. Mess up our goals and vision, and that would take away from the goal that the company can us forward as a financial farm and everything else.
Okay.
Anyone else? Yes, no one, I think.
I guess like, you said that they're not wanting to pull in outside investors, but their long-term debt will not buy almost 30,000. Kind of wondering why that would.
Can you say anything loud?
On their long-term debt increase by like 100,000. Some big curious why that would be happening.
They're not getting
What do you mean? This-
external financing, but
this number?
Yeah,
That's for, so if you were earlier, in the slide, they wanted to. That's just the image that they wanted to, increase, well, finance debt and build liquidity to help them, maintain that growth. So that's where that was coming from. So,
if they wanted to keep the debt to equity ratio
yeah,
constant from the previous year.
that all allows us like there's the goals that they.
Yeah. This is just what they specifically asked, not our specific recommendation. This is based more off of the question.
So I think the last part of the question, right?
Right.
The last question, so basically on the last one, asked like, if they have 40% growth in their revenue, and if they want to maintain same debt equity ratio.
Yeah.
And then to keep it constant, that ratio, then they have to actually address the corporate policy, so.
Right.
Your question. Anyone else? Okay, can we go back? I have some. Can you go back to, second slide? Not second, slide, sorry. Fourth one. Yes, this one. Can you guys explain like how did you calculate the internal growth rate on there?
You mean,
Yeah, so basically, if I ask everyone, how did you calculate growth in the class? Take the total assets times the retention rate over. That's what I did in the class.
Oh, are you,
In general, what do you need in the class? How can you calculate growth?
we did not base this off of what we did
Yeah,
in
I should have
class.
looked at my notes, but I did a quick research of how to calculate internal growth rate. And I used that formula to do the same general. But we have a formula for 30 years. That's kind of inflating your growth, because if you look carefully, the way you calculate the growth here, it's return on asset times V, which is basically the growth, internal growth, divided by 1 minus return on asset times V, which is growth divided by 1 minus growth. You see my point?
So are you saying we should have just used B?
Yeah, you just should use the numerator one. That's it.
Okay,
Because if you don't do the denominator one, then it should be on 10%. But you're inflating to 12%, which is kind of inflating the results towards the, like, think of this, so you are the investor for this corporation, you have to buy stocks here, it's inflating value. 2% more. Does that make sense?
Okay.
One more questions I have is like, I think, extending Gabriel's questions. Can you go to Alibaba external financing slide? So yeah, I think Gabriel, like I said, you guys asked about 1, 2, whatever. About 4, only about 4, like what kind of business do you think of the industry? What kind of business do you do? Food. So basically, when you go to Walmart to buy any food, for example, you have no preference for any specific brand. Like, for example, this is the brand I want, doesn't matter how much they charge. If this is the situation, you don't have any specific preference. When you want to buy cookies A versus cookies B, what is your priority? Price. If any corporation increase price, are you gonna buy the cookies of that corporations?
No, but based on the information that they gave us, they make really good oatmeal, so it's like.
Everyone makes really good oatmeal, right? If you compare the cars of Toyota versus Honda versus Nissan, how much different they really are? They're not. 10 years before, when Tesla used to do only electric car, that's different, really different, right? So my point of view is, if they are not competing in a monopoly type industry, so monopoly or oligopoly type industries, in general, in the competitive market, no, they don't have that power. Number 4, they don't have that power.
Right. Yeah, that's why I said we'd have to look for substitutes, and if there were substitutes, this would not be the right thing to do.
And on the last slide. No, sorry. Not the last one, yes. So you guys really did make some good projections about income statement and balance sheet. And I think to be specific on that slide, you are trying to say they have 40% growth in 2016 sales, right? And as a result, they have a lot of income, a lot of return. It's perfectly okay. You are adding those returns, increasing the debt capital. And to balance the balance sheet, you actually increase cash volumes, right? It looks not 100% okay, because when you're expecting a corporation is going for growth by investing in cash, that assumption is not correct.
Okay. We wanted to put that money back into
PPE,
PPE.
you did not do that.
Well, the thing is, I thought they wanted to keep PPE the same. That's the assumption that, because we originally did do that, but we had like a second change.
I'm just giving you feedback, but in real life, when you do that, that doesn't look good.
Okay.
Because you're investing in cash, no interest on cash, right? Good, you guys did a good job. Any questions, anyone? Okay.
Thank you.